hope you had a chance to check out our deep dive on hand pain and numbness and some of the solutions you might look into for relief. Most of us will experience some discomfort in and through our hands as we hammer around the Leadville course.
Yeah, even after 25 plus years of racing this thing, this is one area that has plagued me. My hands and digits, my forearms screaming out in pain as I ride the closing third of the Leadville course. That Sugarloaf descent is just brutal. It is the section that does me in. After it, my hands are either numb or very, very fatigued and sore, or more often, both.
If you have identified your grips as the reason you are suffering, then we want to remind you that Shimano actually is a place to look for some relief. Actually, it's Shimano's Pro Bike line of accessories. This is the same part of Shimano that makes Fatty's favorite saddle, the Pro Griffin.
I'm going to have to look into those because I love my Pro Griffin. And I got to say, Hottie, I didn't even know that Pro has grips, but it looks like they have several offerings, including 2 ergo-style grips, which have contouring and flat sections for the heel of the hand.
That's right. There's the standard ergo and an ergo race model. The standard has more heel contact area, almost like a wing-shaped grip. The race has less, but it comes in 2 diameters. So don't forget to freshen up your grips, and don't forget about Shimano's Pro line as an option. You can find the grips we mentioned under the accessory section at pro-bikegear.com, and thanks to Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race, presented by Shimano. Find them at bike.shimano.com. Let's see, we're up to season 6, episode 18 now. Wow, they're just flying by. And we're the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, Hottie to most.
I'm Fatty, and this episode features a favorite topic, and that is eating. Scratch Labs Dr. Allen Lim is back for part 2 of his Leadville nutrition tutorial. In episode 13, Allen covered the theories of fueling and hydration. This time, he's going to give us a game plan.
Hey, plus we go into the kitchen with Dr. Lim to get some cooking tips. Allen is more than Scratch Labs after all, so we wanted to tap into his ideas on how we should be eating off the bike.
Yahoo!
What is a good strategy for staying ahead of the cutoff times?
What do the experts say about sleeping effectively at altitude, and what do you each do?
For Leadville, hardtail or full suspension?
Yeah, good question.
Leadville Frequently Asked Questions, LFAQs, a segment that leans on more than 30 years of combined Leadville knowledge.
Oh, man. What have we been doing with our lives, Hottie?
I know, it's a lot of Leadville.
It is.
Friend of the pod, Jeff Diefenbach, asked an interesting question recently, and he did so on our Slack channel, and he answered it as only Jeff can do. He answered his own question with his own math. We know that the Leadville course tops out at 12,500 feet, and it sinks as low as 9,200. Well, Jeff wondered what the median elevation is and how much time we spend in individual elevation zones. So, the median elevation over the whole course, 105 miles. Do you have a guess, Fatty?
I need someone to explain what median means. Is median like average?
No, actually, it's not. I was going to ask Jeff, but I didn't want to look too silly, so I just went with his wording, median.
Okay. Well, I'm going to guess, and I'm based on median meaning average here, but I would say it is right around 10,000. We start at 10.2, we drop, we rise, we descend again, and then we've kind of got this chunk of descending that gets us at a rolling 10,000 feet average. So I think on average, we spend the day at around essentially the same altitude as the city of Leadville itself. So I'm saying 10,000.
Yeah. Well, remember, Jeff is an MIT grad and a staffer there, and he thinks in spreadsheets. So I wasn't going to question whether it was average or median and why he used either. I just went with it. He's Jeff after all, right? And if he wants median, it's median. And his spreadsheet tells us it's 9,800 50 feet. I would have guessed a little higher, just like you, but not too much, right? I think we're kind of in the right
We're
area,
close.
right? Okay. 59% of the mileage on the Leadville course is below 10,000 feet. 31% is between 10 and 11,000 feet. And then about 8% of the mileage is 11,000 feet or higher to the high point of the race. But more importantly here is what elevations do we spend most of our time riding? For that calculation, Jeff looked at some of your rides, Fatty. So one would assume you would have a good feel, that is, for this answer.
I will tell you that I feel like I spend all of my time above 11,000 feet. I mean, that's the part of the day that you really, that really burns itself into your memory. But I mean, to be honest, I don't know. I know you hit 11,000 in two places, right? On Powerline and Columbine. So those are the two toughest places in the race. You feel it. But you don't spend a lot of time above 11,000 when you're on Powerline. You touch it and then you drop down below it again. But it's a different story on Columbine where you hit 11,000 and then you've got another 1,500 feet of climbing to do. So I'm going to say it feels like maybe 10% of the race is above 11K. And honestly, the rest, Hottie, I can't parse. It all kind of just feels like, like riding hard and wishing I had more air.
Well, which is exactly correct. You are riding hard. In fact, no matter what elevation you're at, you're pretty much riding hard, maybe except some of the faster descents. So in 2021, on a geared bike, Jeff found that you spent 52% of your time riding below 10,000 feet.
So just a little bit more than half. Almost, yeah, okay.
Yeah. 35% of your riding was done between 10 and 11,000 feet. The rest, about 13% of your time, was spent above 11,000 feet. So that zone where you felt like you were spending eternity was about 13% of your riding time. Now, that section of the course in distance, that section above 11,000 feet, represents about 8% of the total mileage. So we have a swing here from distance to time of about 5%, right? And here's why, according to Jeff. He says at the higher elevations, you're never really riding flat, ignoring that bit of flat at the top of Sugarloaf. You're either climbing or descending. And for a given distance, it always takes way more time to climb than it does to descend. That is, you don't save as much time descending as the climbing costs you. So that's why we have that swing there between distance and time, right? As far as percentages go. By comparison, a fair bit of the terrain below 10,000 feet is actually fairly flat, that is. So per mile, average speed is actually higher there.
Yeah, that checks out. Jeff's a good thinker, great Leadville thinker. Love that he does the math that I wish I could do. He's on the Slack channel all the time answering folks' questions, keeping the conversation going. I love spending time in that Slack channel. You can find it at leadville.fm/Slack. Jeff was, of course, one of our guests in episode 11 this season, talking about the odds of succeeding from the White Corral. And of course, you can read Jeff's whole post about median elevation. I'll have to look that up so that I can understand what a median versus average is. You'll find that at diefenbike.wordpress.com.
Since we've been talking about elevation, let's talk about how you're going to get up those hills. Like Jeff's math told us, your time going up, especially Leadville's highest climbs, are more time consuming mile for mile than anything else you will face. And for those sections, you need a wheel set that puts climbing first.
Yep. And the wheel set for me for that is the NVM5. Just think about what's ahead of you. The Keevens climb, which is the punchy early morning climb with the double-digit gradient near to the top. Then there is Columbine and, that grind and the goat trail kick and the quads at the high point. And then, of course, Powerline. Powerline. Ugh. Sure, you are going to walk, the first half mile of it or more. But the top section, you're going to ride, and you're going to want the best climbing wheel possible to clean that beast. It says right there on the NV site, the M5 is made to crush the worst climbs. Sounds like we're naming just the three worst.
Envy's own ranking of what applications each of the wheels are for really bears out. And here's what it says about the M5. Descending, 6 out of 10. Climbing, 10 out of 10. Impact toughness, 5 out of 10. Compliance, 8 out of 10.
Yeah, obviously no wheel can honestly be assessed as perfect for every condition. But if you were going to bias what a wheel is good for at Leadville, that is how you would do it. 10 out of 10 for climbing, springy and lively for the choppy dirt roads, and tough enough for everything Leadville throws at it for the descents. Seriously, try the NVM5. After you've tried other wheels, you are going to see why we love them.
Check out Envy's wheels and other carbon components at Envy. That's ENVE.com.
It's always great to have a trusted voice on the show, someone who brings real credibility to an area that is so important to your Leadville race. And that area this time is race nutrition, and that someone is Scratch Labs' Dr. Allen Lim.
You'll remember Allen was with us episode 13 talking about the latest in sports nutrition. But this time he's here to lay out a race day plan. We will also talk about how to eat like a pro off the bike. Now, do we need to tell you about Dr. Allen Lim? That he has a doctorate in applied exercise science from the University of Colorado, that he has worked with world tour teams, that he helped usher in the use of power meters, that he invented the super secret drink mix, that he made famous rice cakes wrapped in foil, that he's a founder of Scratch Lab and the author of 3 books. Do our listeners need to be reminded of all that? Probably not, but just in case, we did so anyway. And that's the basics on our guest, Dr. Allen Lim. So take us to your Leadville feed zone, Dr. Lim. What do you have spread out on the tables? What are you handing up there to your racers at Leadville?
I always bring rice cakes. They're easy to eat. They're very, very savory. They're very different than what you might find in course, and they satisfy this kind of urge or need for something really, really salty and something that just kind of, changes the profile of your palate. And this is a really simple recipe of sushi rice mixed with a little Bragg's amino, some olive oil, some vinegar, and a little bit of maple syrup for the rice base. And then we add scrambled eggs and chopped up bacon to that. Put it in a brownie pan, cut them up in little brownie squares, wrap them up in a paper foil. That's just kind of an in-case kind of thing at the feed zone. They just want to stuff their mouth and take some time to chew and eat something and have something in their stomach. The other thing we have is we have regular sports drink at a 4% solution. That's 4 grams per every 100 mils. And we usually keep that at about 800 milligrams of sodium per liter. And then we have our high carb solution. Depending upon the athlete, we know that they can handle anywhere from 20% to 40% solution of that carbohydrate. That's, 20 grams per 100 mils or 40 grams per 100 mils. At that level, at 20 grams per 100 mils, that gives 800 milligrams of sodium per liter, which is about equivalent to salt. But for, people who lose more at 40 grams, that's 1,600, right? We even find that some people can double our sports drink to get more salt in, and that doesn't cause any GI distress. So we'll have that in either Camelbacks for the athletes, depending on how they want to ingest that liquid carbohydrate, or have that in, kind of a Hydro Pack soft flask in 150 mil doses as well. I've seen athletes, get by just refilling bottles in the cages and going through, 150 mil Hydro Pack with 50 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That means they go through 10. They're starting in their pocket with 3 or 4, and they're just grabbing another 3 or 4 every time they're coming through the feed zone, right? For a total of maybe 12 of those.
Yeah. I will say that I'm going to borrow one of Hottie's famous quotes, "The food is mood," which is, I think, actually, it really holds its place. And I will say that Dr. Lim's rice cakes have been something that have proven that out many times over for me. I don't know if you remember, but back when your first Feed Zone Portables cookbook came out, the first one, and we had a little chat on my old blog, fatcyclist.com, that you'll be interested to know, it remains one of the most hit pages on my site, because I have the recipe for your, basically the foundational rice cake recipe is on there with your permission, I will say.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it is something that I still use to this day, and it is a super easy base to experiment with and put, different kinds of things in it. So yes, try that for your training, I will say, as well as something that you eat as you cross through an aid station on race day.
Yeah. The last thing we'll have in the feed zone is we'll have chicken broth or bone broth that's salty. And what's interesting is that we like soup when soup starts to approach the same saltiness as blood, about 3,500 milligrams of sodium per liter. So we keep ours at about 4,000-ish milligrams of sodium per liter. That's a lot of salt. But if someone's in a bad way and we know that they just haven't been getting enough sodium during the event, we'll give them that broth. And it usually helps to really bring them back. And it's equivalent to almost giving them a bit of a saline solution in the feed zone.
There is a simple approach that I have done for that. It's been a while since I've actually done this, but I used to keep those little Campbell's single-serve pull top soups, the chicken and stars, available. And those things, if you ever look at the nutrition information, it is an insane amount of sodium to take on board during normal life. But in the race event, it is convenient, it is sealed, it is super easy. For people who are racing without a crew, those are a really nice little thing to throw in there and have available. If you sense that you're craving salt, there's a good chance your body's telling you something. And I have had my day really start looking up after popping that kind of top. Having a crew who can make something that actually is delicious and much better for you than chicken and stars soup. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Most people will be losing about 1,000 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. And at a race like Leadville, it's so high and it's so dry that you could easily be losing 2 liters an hour of sweat, right? So that's 2,000 milligrams of sodium. And some people can lose a lot more, up to 1,500 or 2,000 milligrams per liter of sweat. Other people, are lucky genetically that they may only be losing 500 milligrams of sodium per liter. What's interesting is that if you are drinking to thirst, which, I advocate for, and you find yourself on your training rides that you are still losing a lot of body weight, meaning more than 3% of your body weight for a training session, then instead of trying to force yourself to drink more, add more sodium to your drink mix. If that corrects itself, then you're good to go, because what will happen is that extra sodium will increase your drive for thirst and you will self-correct. Instead of telling athletes to try to drink more water, for those who seem to be under drinking, we just add more sodium, because the thirst mechanism during exercise, one of the things that it's responding to is electrolyte balance, and it will keep you from drinking in excess of water if you don't have enough sodium in the pool. And since you're losing sodium in sweat, and some people might be losing more sodium, then there's a reason why some people might be underhydrated by thirst. And that's an important reason. They're keeping themselves in electrolyte balance. And that's a good protective mechanism. And so we always tell people not to drink beyond their thirst mechanism. But if they find themselves really dehydrated, listening to that thirst, to increase the sodium. Let sodium lead the drinking, not vice versa.
So Dr. Lim, I want to talk about race day tactics for fueling itself. Let's start at the starting line.
Yeah, I think it's really important. You've got to keep a couple of concepts in mind that while you want to have an even pace, there are going to be terrain situations that force you to go a lot harder, right? Whether that's a big climb or it's a race situation, and even the start, we always come out of the gates a little harder. So at the start line, we always have the athletes start consuming carbohydrate about 10 minutes before they actually start and try to preload. It's really cold at Leadville in the morning time, and so it can be a little hard to do that. So we have this formula called our clear hydration, which is basically made out of the cluster dextrin or the highly branched cyclic dextrin, but it has a sodium amount that is equivalent to our sports drink. So the carbohydrate to electrolyte concentration is higher on the electrolyte side for that product. We will put in about 80 grams of that in a half-liter bottle. That that gets the salt level up to about saline, about 3,500 milligrams of sodium per liter. We have the athletes drink between the whole bottle to half the bottle 10 minutes at the start line just to preload themselves with carbohydrate with a really salty fluid so that they don't need to pee, right? It helps keep the kidneys from needing to kind of filter that excess water out, especially when it's cold. And so they kind of meter themselves. What that does is it gets their blood sugar up for the beginning of the race. And it also gives them a little bit of extra fluid at the beginning of the race, right? So that's tip number one.
I'm laughing because we very recently had on some really young kids who did a fast time at Leadville. One of these brothers had to pee 4 times during the first 25 miles. I'm like, I hope he's listening because he just picked up a real good tip for this year's race. Okay, let's go on. I'm sorry. I had to interrupt with that. So
yeah, the peeing in the first part of the race when it's so cold can act as a bit of a diuretic. That's really kind of key. And so we're trying to manage a higher concentration of carbohydrate with the cluster dextrin, as well as this really high sodium initially to try to keep the athletes from needing to pee too much. Number 2, you still want to keep very consistent about, say, if the goal is 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour to get that paced in per hour. But what we'll try to do is we'll also add the geography into account. So if they're about to hit a major climb like Powerline or whatever it is, 10 minutes before they hit that, we'll do at least one of those little 150 ml flasks with 40 grams of carbohydrate, 20 grams of carbohydrate, just so that as they're approaching that climb, their blood sugar is also peaking again, right? And it can take anywhere from, say, 5 to 15 minutes for that blood sugar to start to rise after you take on some liquid carbohydrate. So that's another part of the pacing strategy.
Yeah, I'm just translating that for our listeners. Basically, as you hit the pavement after descending down May Queen, you're about 10 minutes before you start the Sugarloaf climb. That is a good time, both in terms of ease of taking something on board because you're on nice, even pavement for a minute, and you're about to start a big climb, Hagerman's to Sugarloaf. That is a good time, as Dr. Lim just said, to go ahead and get that fuel on board.
Yeah. There's another thing that I've learned from the marathon is that even though these athletes are running as fast as they can, they know that feeding is so important that if something goes wrong as they're trying to pick something up at one of those feed zone tables, they won't just bypass it. They'll stop. They'll take their time. They'll get on that carbohydrate. They'll stop enough so that they can actually lower the ventilation rate and fuel and then keep on going, because preventing that bonk is way more important than, say, losing 30 or 40 seconds, right? So if it means that you actually have to stop mid-race at a number of points and give up a minute just so that you can properly feed yourself, those 5 or 6 minutes could translate into what might otherwise be a lost hour if you hit the wall.
Let's talk a little bit about the second quarter of the race. That is from Pipeline, you've got 15 miles of more or less rolling, flattish riding. And then you've got one of the 2 iconic climbs of the day, the Columbine climb to 12,500 feet. You were riding uphill more or less for 10 miles, 3,000 plus feet. What is the feeding strategy for, these 2 vastly different kinds of riding that are linked up together?
I think for most people, the advice is stop at Pipeline, right? I see the front runners, always come through, always grabbing a new bottle. They're racing. You also see them as they're coming through that flat section, opening up packages, taking in their gels, taking in food, trying to eat, trying to draft, taking care of themselves, etc. There is this kind of natural pause. I think that, forcing yourself to do a bit of a reset through there is really, really important, right? But again, the idea that you are being consistent as opposed to trying to do a whole entire lunch break there, right, is important as well, because you never want to take on too much at one time. You want to be consistent about it.
And then how about any fueling recommendations for as you do that, the big climb of the day, the climb up to the turnaround at Columbine where you're at 12,500 feet and then rocketing back down?
Yeah. If you have done things right, you're just going to let it ride, right? You're just going to ride those climbs, and you're not too worried about your putting anything in the mouth. You're just going to focus on the climb. That being said, it could also be a point where you're also getting really hot and the temperatures could be all over the place. And so another idea or another strategy might be that there could be occasion as you're going through the last feed zone to grab just plain water to pour over yourself and to cool off before the climb, and finding some way to lower your body temperature for that climb, because the climb ends up being just get over it, and you almost can't choose your pace. And so besides nutrition and making sure that you've been on track with respect to hydration, carbohydrate, salt, you might want to lower your pace for a little while just so your body temperature cools off, right? And so that you have some of that buffer to be able to ride a harder intensity and let that body temp come back up again.
The place where I have been for years and years, most likely to suddenly hit the wall, is after I've come down Columbine, I've gone through Twin Lakes, I'm about 60 miles in, and I've got that 15-mile stretch of flat. Should be easy, but that is where I frequently fade. Maybe it's because I'm 60 miles into the race. I'm hungry. I'm tired. It's been a big day already and I've still got a lot ahead of me, but I have hit the wall so many times there. What can racers do to ensure that basically by the time they get to mile 75 and have what is, as far as we're concerned, the hardest part of the day, the power line and then the pavement climb, that they still have something left in the tank?
My biggest recommendation is stop. Take a moment, right? Take some time, reset, cool off, slow down your breathing, have a rice cake, have something solid that you can eat. That 5 or 10 minutes that you take to really reset could actually save the whole rest of the race, especially when you're in that weird 60 to 75 mile point and you're already really, really fatigued and you have a lot of challenging course left, right? And in that weird flat section too, wind can get really weird and swirly sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I didn't even account for the fact that now out of nowhere there's some sort of headwind, right?
Head and head crosswinds, man, so common in that section of the race.
Yeah. So just stop, take a moment, that 10, 15 minutes, that reset could change the whole, next 20, 30 miles.
Okay. And then for the grand finale, getting up power line. It is, just 4 miles, but you are exhausted. It is an intensely difficult climb, followed by a quick descent, and then another intensely difficult 3-mile plus road climb. So 2 climbs chained together, you are exhausted. Any fueling tips just for getting through to the end of the race?
I think the biggest fueling tip at that point is that remember, throughout the whole entire race, the fueling that you've done is going to provide you the energy for that last moment. So even in the first hour of lead fill, the fuel you take on is helping you for that very last section, right? And so I can't emphasize enough how much consistency ahead of the day matters. And you're spending maybe 9 hours of your day for that last section, preparing for that last section. I don't think at that point that there is any kind of magic that you might be able to employ if you haven't already been consistent.
Yep, absolutely. It is consistency, staying on top of things, putting yourself in a good position so that you are not on the threshold of a bonk for what is, in the end, the most difficult part of this race.
That's right. And maybe if you know that you're in trouble, the recommendation would be take 10 or 15 minutes to sit down, drink, eat, allow yourself kind of the blood flow, right, to absorb all those nutrients, right? And now there's not this competition for, I need to, drive my muscles, I need to drive cooling, etc., so that you can kind of give all of your resources to absorbing that fuel and then going for it.
Yeah, and it is hard in the moment to do that. You think I'm in a race. Anytime that I am at 0 miles per hour, my average is dropping. But the fact is, you invest a little bit of time to get your body back into a place where you are able to keep riding your bike instead of having an emergency stop later during a bonk is a huge investment in finishing the Leadville 100. It's great advice.
That's right. That's right. Those little pauses, man, they can totally make or break the whole entire race, especially if you are just letting things calm down. We talked about how absorption can be a competition of blood flow. And so if you just prioritize that refueling, that pit stop, you're going to be A-okay.
Food in your pocket, hydration in your bottle. Lots of people have said it. Our guest, Dr. Allen Lim, was one of the first. You will more than likely have food in your pockets for this race, and that means reaching in and grabbing what you hope you want while bouncing along on a dirt road. That is not easy, and it is not something you want held up by lousy jersey pockets.
That's right. This is another one of those little things that is easy to overlook, but trust us. If a sponsored pro rider is having problems getting food out of his or her pockets, they will let their clothing sponsor know about it. You probably don't have that luxury, right? Which is why you're going to have to trust us on this one when we say DNA jerseys are perfectly capable of storing what you need. And when it comes time to reach for it in your pocket, you'll have no issues grabbing that gel or that bar or whatever you need.
Yeah, it is one of the reasons I love DNA. The race day jerseys are not only snug the way I like them, but the fabric stretches when and where I need it to. When I reach into my pockets and I'm bouncing up and down the pipeline section, the fabric gives nicely, so I can fish out a gel quickly and easily without getting my hand jammed up in my jersey pocket.
Right, and if you want more pockets than the 3 on a jersey, DNA also has those adventure bibs with pockets on the side panels to really emphasize that food in your pocket mantra.
Yeah, I love those. That's where I stow my used gel packets, just right in those side panel pockets. Keep the empties and the full gels separated. As you prepare for Leadville, don't forget the little things like a jersey with good pockets, and you can find one or more at dnacycling.com.
We want to thank the feed for sponsoring our feature for this episode. As we continue with Dr. Allen Lim, we get out our chef's knives for some cooking tips. Well, Dr. Lim, in addition to Scratch Labs, hey, you've become a heck of an author here with 3 books out. We have the Feed Zone cookbooks, Feed Zone portables, and the Feed Zone table. I have all 3. If I could, I'd have you sign one right now virtually, but we'll forego that for a little discussion on how to nourish ourselves off the bike. What are the things you would say every endurance athlete should be aiming for when it concerns their off-the-bike eating?
I'd be remiss not to thank Chef Bijou Thomas here, right? Because I learned so much about how to answer this question from him, which was learn how to cook and learn how to cook some key, simple meals. I think it's like sometimes we learn certain recipes to impress others, but in this case, you're learning certain recipes to impress and take care of yourself. And it doesn't have to be complicated, right? First and foremost, learn to cook some type of carbohydrate staple, whether that's boiling potatoes, cooking rice, or, freaking boiling pasta. If you can boil, you can make any of those 3 things. You can make pasta, you can make potatoes, and you can make rice. And if that ends up being kind of the foundation of your plate in terms of carbohydrate as an endurance athlete, you're going a long way to cooking. Next, it's like, hey, make it taste good. You boil pasta, you boil potatoes, you make rice. You can add some salt to it. You can add some pepper to it. You can add some nice olive oil or butter, right? Some acid to it. And holy cow, you have the foundation for a great meal. The elements to making something taste good are very, very simple, right? You need some sort of fat. You need some sort of acid, right? And you need a little bit of seasoning. From there, I think next foundationally, you've got to get good and you've got a desire to cook plants, right? Before you worry about your proteins, et cetera, blah, 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 just think about the vegetables that you never eat. And that will round out all of those phytochemicals and all of those micronutrients, all the fiber that you need that are so vital to our day-to-day health and performance, right? And again, seasoning those vegetables, et cetera, doesn't have to be very complicated. And then finally, you can think about your protein. Eggs are really simple. If you're vegetarian, if you're vegan, you do have to really invest in the plants that give you the complete protein. You don't have to worry about trying to get that all in at one time, but you can get it in over the course of the day. So, that's beans and lentils and things of this nature, right? And then if you do you like animal protein? Yeah, learn some very simple dishes, right? Pick up some cookbooks, take your time, realize that things are not perfect. You only need maybe one pan, one pot, a couple of utensils. Just try is what I tell, the athletes that I work with, right? And don't see it as a chore. Try to find some joy and some community in it, right? And so there are ways that you can hold yourself accountable to it, which is, maybe inviting some of your teammates over and testing yourself by cooking a meal that might put the kind of pressure you need to actually try to cook and, put the same kind of pressure on them as well. And that not only forms the kind of nutritional value that we need from food, but it also creates the social value that we need in connecting with one another.
From the Feed Zone table, I love the grilled romaine salad. Great dish, very easy, comes together real quick. It's a great way to build taste into lettuce greens or romaine greens, right? Because you grill the lettuce. It actually creates a little sweetness out of the lettuce. I also love the roasted chickpea and summer veg dish. Again, getting veg in there. It's easy. It's flavorful as well. So a neat dish. What are some of do you think, the more approachable dishes, just off the top of your head, Dr. Lim, that any beginner cook can tackle?
In the original Feed Zone, the chicken fried rice is so simple, but it goes a long way to impressing because it's a full self-contained kind of dish that is really, really delicious. And there aren't too many components there. And there's only one pan or one wok that's needed to make that besides, pre-cooking the rice. I think too, as a busy athlete, the fried rice is a good example of how you can prepare all of these different components separately and at a different time, and they can come together in 10 or 15 minutes. So I might cook rice in the morning, right? And then just leave that in the rice cooker. And by evening, it's ready to fry. I might, pre-cook some chicken on the weekend and have that, in tubs ready to cut up and throw in that fried rice, right? Mise en place, or having everything in its place, having a well-organized kitchen, and doing all these tasks that make cooking a chore and a hassle, like chopping all your onions or chopping all the ingredients. You can have that in little quart containers in your refrigerator, always ready to go for your meals, and finding some time when you're relaxed to do prep rather than stressing out when you get back from a bike ride or you're trying to put together dinner can be really, really beneficial. It's a way to keep yourself cool and calm when you're hangry.
Yeah, learn a soup. Man, soups go a long ways. They're generally pretty easy to make. They come together quickly. Learn a soup. I always tell folks to learn how to roast a chicken. If you can, like Dr. Lim said, if you have chicken around, that goes so many ways. And if you learn how to properly roast a chicken, maybe with some root vegetables, boom, your goal then. And try to commit these recipes to memory, right? If you got them in your memory, Dr. Lim, they actually come out quite quickly.
That's right. That's right. You might even just like practice the same recipe for a week and you will nail it and it'll just become part of your memory, part of your repertoire. Roasting a chicken, for example, seems so intimidating, but all you have to do is just throw that thing in an oven that's hot. And it's generally actually surprisingly hard to screw up, right? As long as you're keeping an eye on it. And for me, like I might, splash cock a chicken, which is just basically cutting it in half and pressing it down into a pan, getting that skin crispy, and then throwing it in the oven to finish it. It's so delicious. It always works. And, with the YouTubes too, you can just go online and just watch some of these really simple recipes and learn online how to cook. Sports nutrition really starts in your kitchen, and the time that you invest in the kitchen is as important as the time that you invest riding the bicycle.
Yep. Get a good thermopan too. That'll help you with that chicken. Get it just right, just the temperature just right.
That's right.
Dr. Lim, you said rice obviously is in your pantry. Rice is in your pantry. What else is in your pantry? What do you like to see in a pantry?
I like seeing potatoes. They're easy. I like seeing pasta. That's easy. I like seeing, oatmeal is another thing that is always in the pantry. Eggs are typically always around in there. I tend to keep everything, in just like these nice little quart containers so that that my pantry doesn't turn into a mess. And I just take, blue, painter's tape and just mark things so that I remember that I have something that I don't have to go get again, right? Whether it's nuts or beans or, any other type of ingredient, getting organized in terms of how you store things will create a lot less food waste and just give you the palate, if you will, to create good meals. Yeah, I've got some cornmeal here that I'm going to play with.
Well, you just became my wife's biggest hero too, because she loves to organize our pantry as all containers and labeled and laid out.
Yeah.
And so the two of you would do perfect together. Take us through some pre-race meals. Give us just an example of dinner and breakfast. You don't have to go through the whole menu, but an example of what you like to serve an athlete for dinner and for breakfast.
Yeah. So for a common dinner might be pad thai. And what we'll tend to do, some athletes don't like to have a lot of fiber the night before they eat. And so they really love to just focus on the carbohydrate side of things. And so I'll make a big pad thai, but I'll separate out a lot of the components of it. So we'll have the pasta that has got this really nice pad thai sauce. And you can go to any even Chinese supermarket or market and just even buy a pre-made pad thai sauce. It works pretty well. I'll mix in the eggs with that base, and then maybe we'll have a bunch of roasted chicken on the side. Maybe we'll have, a nice roasted vegetable as part of that meal as well. And it gives the athletes some agency as to how they want to actually form their meal, right? Especially the night before. And it also allows all the staffers and all of my staff who are there supporting the athletes to actually eat like normal human beings if they don't want to just, eat all carbohydrate at 7 kilos of carbohydrate the night before, right? So yeah, we will have a big dish of some type of carbohydrate. We'll have some, nice, really protein dish. We'll have a nice set of veggies, etc. At Mid-South, which was the last race I was at, we had a big Japanese curry. And what we ended up doing was we had a bunch of braised pork. We had this vegetarian or vegan curry base. We had a bunch of rice, and then we had this kind of chickpea, kale with cauliflower tahini vegetable dish. Some of the athletes who were racing just focused on the rice and the curry base, right? And some of the protein. The staffers ate more of the vegetables, and they mixed and matched from there. So that's the architecture. For the breakfast, there are kind of two components. We always have rice and we always have eggs. And some of the athletes will just stick to that. They'll just have rice, eggs, some olive oil, some seasoning, but we'll also have an oatmeal as well. And usually it's some beautiful oatmeal made with coconut milk, mangoes, some type of, frozen fruit works really well, nuts, berries, etc. We'll have eggs there. We might have some bacon, etc. And so athletes can have maybe a very traditional kind of oatmeal style breakfast, or they can have this more kind of carbohydrate protein only type of breakfast according to their needs. That keeps it pretty simple as well. We'll have rice cakes that they can keep in their pocket as they warm up and snack on. And then we'll start making all the solutions, the high carb solutions and the regular carb solutions for the start line and for the rest of the race.
I've noticed pancakes and waffles making a comeback too, so I'm glad to see that. I love the pancakes and waffles. Like Fatty said, food is mood to me. I mean, I'd always, for Leadville or whatever race, I'd put bacon out because bacon's not a great fuel source, but man, it puts me in a great mood. I love the smell of it. Great, I'm having bacon. I mean, it makes you feel good. A little piece of bacon's not going to end your day at Leadville. Speaking of rice and oats, Dr. Lim, cooking at altitude, man, getting rice and oats, and I watched a buddy of mine try to cook potatoes once at 10,000 feet. It was a train wreck. Like, it's really difficult to get that stuff to come out right. So you got any tips for cooking at altitude?
Yeah, don't stay at Leadville. Go down to Frisco, go down to our lower elevations, sleep and stay down there, and then drive the 45 minutes up that next morning. That's actually a protocol that we now kind of always do. I tend to discourage athletes from staying up there because it is too high and their sleep suffers. It's hard to cook, and it's kind of worth just waking up a little earlier and driving up that morning. Otherwise, you got to just be really patient. That's the biggest tip, is you got to be patient, and you got to bring a pressure cooker up there if you want things to go fast.
And bring a rice cooker, I will say as well. I mean, that is one of the investments I made when your first book came out. And now that rice cooker, a nice little Zojirushi, is the outside. What used to be this nice looking beige finish on it has sort of become sun faded and terrible, but it has lasted for more than 15 years. And I take it all over the place. It is beat up looking, still works great. I wonder how many kilotons of rice I have made in that thing at races and at home. That thing is just, it's worth its weight in gold.
It is. It's so important. Those little tools that make or break everything, right? And, I think that for Leadville, maybe your most important tool could be an Instapot. You can do a lot of really great one meal scenarios with that up there, and it's a pressure cooker. So it will cook fast. It will cook well, and you can make a bunch of really great stews. Bring that Zojirushi as well, which has a locking lid, which creates some pressure, and you can feed a ton of people with 2 basic appliances.
And you can wax your chain in an Instapot. But that's for another show and for another podcast. Dr. Lim, this has been great. Man, we've learned a lot here about feeding ourselves on the bike and off. We want to thank you for everything you've done and you're continuing to do. Good luck with Scratch. Good luck at Leadville this year. Good luck with it all.
Thank you very much. And if you're coming through Colorado for Leadville, stop at the Scratch Labs Cafe. We'll make you a bunch of rice cakes that you can take up there too. So we've got a restaurant now here in town on Pearl Street that I think will make a big difference for the traveling athletes who are coming through. So as you're driving up there from DIA, come by and say hello.
Thanks again to Dr. Lim, his race day nutrition plan, and also for helping us out in the kitchen. And we'd also like again to acknowledge our resident mathematician and data analyst, Jeff Diefenbach, for his work on Leadville's elevation.
Yeah, we want to thank the feed for sponsoring this segment and for putting us in contact with Dr. Lim. The Scratch Lab Superfuels, other products that Dr. Lim referenced, are available, of course, at the feed. The feed is sponsor of this and every episode of the Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Podcast. As a listener, you can get a great discount from them. Claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. You register your email, you verify your phone number, then you're all set to spend your first feed credit of $20 right away. Let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. Hottie and I are on social media. On Instagram, it's @Michael Houghton, and I'm easy to find on Strava. Just open up a browser, go to leadville.fm/fatty. And of course, we're both on the Facebook Leadville 100 mountain bike page. If you want to have a conversation with us, just join our Slack channel. You will find a link to it over at leadville.fm/Slack.
If you like the show, go to wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating and write a review. To see all the ways you can find the show, it is leadville.fm. Good luck in your riding, racing, and recovery. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the start line.